Hello everyone, and welcome back to another cartography lecture video. And in this lecture video, I want to kick off our discussion of this week's module, talking about choropleth maps and color. Color and choropleth maps. So if you remember back in last week's module when we talked about the visual variables, well, in this week's module we're going to talk about color, which was those last three visual variables that we didn't discuss last time: hue, saturation, and value. And what I want to do in this module is break down those three visual variables in detail, talk about where each one comes from, what they mean, how we produce color, and then finally talk about how we can use this idea of color to create a new mapping approach called choropleth mapping, where we're using color to describe the variables rather than size or shape or density. And so what we're going to talk about in this module is how and where color comes from, and we're going to basically distinguish between additive and subtractive color models. So additive is going to be the way that we deal with digital formats. And then subtractive is going to be where we deal with the way we deal with physical formats like paper maps and such. And then we're going to talk about how we communicate color. So these are basically going to be the different color models that we use to describe color, or when we want to pick or explain color to a computer to have it produce the color that we want. And then we're going to talk about four models here. We're going to talk about the RGB model, or the red, green, blue model. We're going to talk about the CMYK model, or the cyan, magenta, yellow, black model. Then we're going to talk about the HSV, or the hue, saturation, value model. These three are conceptual, meaning that they relate directly to the way that we would think about mixing colors or subtracting colors, depending on which color format we're talking about. And then we're going to end up with our fourth model, which is going to be hexadecimal, which is really the way that we communicate color in things like websites. Right, a lot of online or code. Right, a lot of times hexadecimal is really useful for dealing with code. So it's a lot used in Java, JavaScript, Python, R, right, CSS. They all typically communicate color in hexadecimal. Whereas things like ArcGIS Pro and Human Perception, we tend to think and deal with color in one of these three. So we're going to communicate those. Then we're going to talk about our second topic, which is choropleth mapping. Which again uses color as the visual variable. And then within choropleth mapping, we're going to talk about three different sort of subgenres of choropleth mapping. We're going to talk about qualitative mapping, which is going to be using color for qualitative data. So that's going to be our nominal and our ordinal. We're going to talk about sequential, which is where we have a color ramp of one color building up or down depending on the variable that we're looking at. And then we're going to talk about divergent choropleth maps, where we are highlighting two the extremes and we're downplaying the middle. And these will make a lot more sense when we look at examples and we talk about the specifics of how they work. And then what I want to do is I want to wrap up the module by talking about some resources for color ramps and color palettes. Because as we go through these examples of choropleth mapping, what you're going to find is that we're going to need what's called a color ramp, where we associate particular colors with particular classes. But we're also going to find ourselves realizing that color in general is a very important concept, and there are a lot of really good resources for generating color schemes, color ramps, and color palettes that we can use not just in our maps, but also not just in our data for our maps, but also in some of the other map elements as well, to really pull together a cohesive color theme. So hopefully that makes sense. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you.